HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Love Like Blood, a novel, by Mark Billingham. Read by Mark Billingham, Sagar, Arya, and Avita J.
What is honour? A word. What is in that word, honour? What is that honour? Air. William Shakespeare, Henry IV, Part 1. The conversation stopped as soon as the woman they had come for arrived. They watched Nicola Tanner's car slow, stop, then reverse expertly into a parking space a few houses down from her own. They watched the woman get out and retrieve something from the boot. They held their breath as she locked the car with a remote and began walking towards her house. Saw her lit for a second or two as she passed beneath a street lamp. One of them said it was a good thing she was carrying bags. The other one asked why it was good, and was told it was good because she'd be distracted. Their whispered breaths were briefly visible, eyes on the woman as she stepped to avoid a slick of leaves on the pavement and hitched her shoulder bag a little higher. They moved out of the shadows and across the road as the woman turned onto her front path. Quickly, but not too quickly, trying to time it right. Heads down and hooded, ready to turn and walk casually away should anyone come along, a dog walker, a nosy neighbour. Emerging from between cars, they were coming through the gate as the woman pushed in her door key, and one of them was calling out her name as she bent to pick up her bags from the step. They had the water pistols out by the time she turned round. She opened her mouth, but the words, the scream, were quickly silenced by the twin jets of bleach, and a few seconds after she staggered back, blinded, and fell into her house, they were on her. Inside. The water pistols were shoved back into pockets, and the bags that had been dropped just over the threshold were kicked aside, so that the door could be shut. Folders and files spilled out onto the hall carpet, a bottle of orange juice, a notebook, pens. They stood and watched as the woman spluttered and kicked out at them, inching herself across the floor towards the foot of the stairs. One of them asked the other where the woman thought she was going, and the other told him that she wasn't going anywhere. The woman continued to kick and shuffle until she reached the bottom stair and tried to sit up. One hand was pressed across her face, while the other clutched at the carpet. She moaned and thrashed, frantic as her eyes and mouth burned, and the scream that resurfaced was strangled by the bleach that had run down her throat. The one who had been asking all the questions said he thought she looked like a crab or something. She moved one hand from her face, gasping as she struggled to open one eye. She squinted and sobbed. Now he asked his partner if he thought the woman could see them. The woman froze when the knife was produced, as one of them moved to kneel down next to her and said that, yes, he thought she probably could. Just about. Part 1. A Perfect Team. Chapter 1. Who wouldn't welcome an unexpected smile? At that moment, standing where he was, Tom Thorne was seriously considering the question. There weren't too many smiles flying about in court, as a rule. When the person doing the smiling was the one being escorted from the dock, having just been convicted of murder, in large part thanks to Thorne, it was, to say the least, mildly disconcerting. Thorne smiled back, raised 2 fingers for good measure, then left the courtroom as quickly as possible. The trial had made the front page of the Standard and had been deemed worthy of a few minutes on the local TV news, but there wasn't a large crowd outside the Old Bailey. No lawyers reading prepared statements before clusters of microphones, no scrum of cameramen jostling for position, no carefully chosen words about justice or grief. Just a few members of the prosecution team shaking hands, and the victim's father talking to a woman Thorne recognised. He watched the awkward hug, then saw her turn and walk in his direction. She was somewhere in her mid-30s and a little below average height. Her round face was framed by brown hair styled into an unfussy bob, the fringe a little straggly. The dark blue skirt and blazer were as practical, as efficient, as Thorne had been led to believe the woman herself was, though of course it might simply have been a case of choosing clothes that were suitable for the occasion. Thorne himself was wearing the dark suit that was only ever dragged out and dry-cleaned for funerals or court appearances. As the woman approached, Thorne adjusted his waistband and told himself that, though he was happy enough to give the funerals a miss, he might need to cut down on the takeaways if he wanted to carry on giving evidence. He shifted from one foot to another, waited. "Good result," the woman said when she finally reached him. Thorne had been preparing to shake hands, but the woman clearly preferred to skip the formalities. "Down to you," he said. "Only to begin with. You did all the legwork." "Well." She seemed content to accept the acknowledgement and stood looking anywhere but at Thorne, as though putting off the moment when she would have to say what was actually on her mind. "Of course you did," Thorne said. "I just came on at the end. Super sub." "That's a football thing, right?" "Right." Thorne knew who D.I. Nicola Tanner was, of course, though they had never met, and he had not been in court the day she had given evidence. 6 months earlier, she had led the inquiry into the murder of a young woman named Heather Finley and become convinced that the killer belonged to a weekly therapy group that Finley had attended, together with other recovering addicts. With the investigation stalled, Thorne had been brought in undercover to join the group, and after several months of regular sessions, had been able to identify a prime suspect. The same suspect who, as of 15 minutes earlier, was now a convicted killer. "Have you got time for a quick chat?" Tanner asked. Thorne could not be sure at whose instigation they had begun to move, but as Tanner asked the question, they were already walking away from the building, the golden figure of Lady Justice towering high above them, sword raised skywards, as if to suggest that she was ready to hand out rather more than an asbo. "Yeah, I think so." They turned along the main road towards Newgate Street. "Thank you," Tanner said. "No problem." Once again, Thorne got the impression that the chat was not one Tanner was looking forward to. It made him a little nervous. Knowing something of her reputation, he wondered if he was about to be pulled up for some lapse in procedure during the latter stages of the Finley case, or perhaps just told firmly that he needed a new suit. "Anyway, we should celebrate," Thorne said, "and there's a decent pub round the corner." He nodded towards the Viaduct, a former gin palace that stood on the site of a debtor's prison. There were usually a few too many legal types in there for Thorne's liking, but the place had a nice selection of toasties, and the beer was always good. A few steps further on, Tanner said, "Can we just go for coffee? Do you mind?" "Well, a latte isn't my idea of a celebration, but if you'd rather." "Sorry, going back to the office?" Tanner was looking straight ahead. "I'm on compassionate leave." Thorne took a breath and said, "Sorry," because he guessed there would be good reason to say it, but he worried it was lost beneath the growl of a passing taxi, so he said it again. Tanner took a few more steps, then stopped. The drizzle, which had been in the air all day, had begun to make good on its threat. She fished in her handbag for an umbrella. "My partner was killed." She unfurled her umbrella and looked up from beneath it at Thorne. "I don't mean my work partner. She was murdered 2 weeks ago." It took Thorne a second or two to process the two very different pieces of information. Jesus. "Her name was Susan Best." Tanner smiled. "Just. She was a teacher." Thorne nodded. He had been aware of the case, the murder victim whose other half was a copper. It was the kind of news that went around, a job-related homicide, though the name of the copper involved had never been mentioned. He thought about Helen, his girlfriend, and said, "Sorry," again, because he didn't know what else to say. "Obviously, I'm not allowed to be part of the investigation in any way," Tanner said. "I mean, those are the rules, and they're there for very good reasons." Thorne had heard enough about Nicola Tanner to know that rules were something she normally set a lot of store by. It was not a trait they had in common. Frustrating, though, good reasons or not. Tanner's look made it clear just how frustrated she was. "It's why I wanted to talk to you." "Well, I'm not involved in it either." Thorne had begun to see where this could be heading and was keen to maintain a degree of distance. He might be willing to make the odd phone call as a favour, to pass on such information as he was able to glean, but he had enough going on as it was to do much beyond that. "Where did it happen?" Hammersmith. Susan was killed at home. I know that's outside your area, but it doesn't really matter because none of this would be on the books anyway. None of what? I need to catch the people who killed her, Tanner said. Of course you do, Thorne said, and I'm sure the team that's on it will catch them. I need your help. Hang on, they thought she was me. Tanner stared hard at Thorne, but only for a moment or two before she half turned away, to avoid the rain that was coming at her in gusts from the side, or perhaps because she did not want him to see what became of her expression. She was driving my car. They killed Susan, but it was me they were after. Now Thorne looked away too. For a few seconds he watched the traffic crawling past towards St. Paul's, the chaotic procession of umbrellas, but he could feel the steady gaze at his back, the scrutiny of the golden figure staring down from the dome behind them, that sword at the ready to mete out punishment. He stepped across and put a hand on Tanner's shoulder to urge her gently forward. Pub, he said. Chapter 2. From the bar, Thorne glanced back to see Tanner sitting patiently at the table they had bagged in the corner. He watched her pick up her phone, swipe at the screen a few times, then set it back down. He watched her use the tips of 2 fingers to straighten the handset in line with the edge of the tabletop before sitting back and folding her hands into her lap. A few seconds later, she moved the phone again. Failing to catch the eye of the barman, Thorne looked around at the pub's lavish Victorian interior, ornate marble columns, gilded mirrors and decorated glass. Fine, he supposed, if you liked that kind of thing, though his own taste ran rather more towards spit and sawdust. A wooden sign listed the rules for those entering the old jail, while another inside the door proudly boasted that the pub was among the most haunted in the city and a regular stop on London's ghost tours. Thorne wondered if the spirits were all those of customers who had died while waiting to be served. Look at the arse on that last one. Thorne turned to see the barman pointing towards a row of large paintings on the far wall. 3 women wearing togas, Thorne supposed they would be called maidens, in various wistful poses, with a statue, what looked like a sheaf of wheat. Agriculture, business, and the arts, the barman said. What they're meant to be. Represent whatever. The one at the end's got a dirty big hole in her rear endo. See? Thorne craned his neck obligingly, but couldn't see anything. Some soldier in the First World War. Shot it or stuck a bayonet in it or something. Everyone's a critic, Thorne said. He carried a glass of Glenfiddich and a pint of Guinness back to the table, laid them well away from Tanner's phone. He raised his glass and Tanner did the same, and for a second or two they stared at one another a little awkwardly. Were they celebrating the result in court, or toasting Tanner's murdered girlfriend? Right. Thorne lowered his eyes and his mouth to the beer. After downing half her whiskey in 2 gulps, Tanner began talking. Though they had said nothing else about her dead partner on the short walk to the pub, she spoke as though picking up the thread of a conversation that had only been briefly interrupted, as though Thorne had invited her to carry on where they'd left off. After the Finlay case, I did some work with the Honour Crimes Unit, she said, such as it is. She waited a few seconds. Some of the murder cases that had gone cold, some of those they suspected were honour killings but couldn't prove. How many's that? A lot more than the official figures would have you believe, but it really depends which sort you're talking about. Tanner reached for a coaster and put her glass down. Some perpetrators take a lot of trouble to make a straightforward honour killing look like something else. Something sexually motivated, a random attack, a suicide, maybe. Sometimes the victim just mysteriously disappears, goes abroad for a wedding and never comes back, and I've come across at least a couple that look suspiciously like faked car accidents. Thorne nodded. These were scenarios he had come across only rarely, but which were none the less familiar. What's the other sort? Half a smile. I knew you'd ask the right questions. Thorne took a sip of Guinness, thinking, or the wrong ones. Up close, he could see that there was rather more grey in Tanner's hair than he had noticed before. That such makeup as there was could not disguise the deep lines around the woman's mouth and the shadowy half-moons beneath her eyes, a face changed by a fortnight of tears and no sleep. Tanner smiled and leaned forward. The answer to Thorne's question was clearly the reason they were here. Well, the trouble with honour killings, for the people that carry them out, I mean, is that any copper with half a brain cell tends to know who they're looking for. It's the father or the brothers or the uncles or some other family combination. Obviously, there's a lot of lying and secrecy to deal with, but we tend to get there in the end. Not quite an open and shut case, but pretty close. Not always men, though, right? No, not always. But 9 times out of 10, it's a relative. I'm guessing it's the 1 time out of 10 that you're interested in, though. Her expression confirmed it. Look, there isn't an ounce of anything like nobility in what these people do. None at all. It's murder, pure and simple, pretending to be something else. But some of those responsible do at least accept that they'll be going to prison for it. The punishment is part of it in some twisted way. Some of them are quite happy to strangle their sisters or daughters and then march into the nearest police station and ask for the handcuffs to be slapped on. Men of honour, Thorne said, the beer not tasting quite as good as it did a minute before. Others are rather more cowardly, if that's even possible. They don't want to get caught, so they pay others to do it. Thorne shrugged. Makes sense. You know, if you're the kind of scumbag who thinks your own flesh and blood deserves to die for wearing a skirt you don't approve of. Right. Because you can't possibly risk going to prison because you're important. You've got a business to run and a family to keep together. You matter. She took another drink, getting to it. Before Susan was killed, I'd become convinced that I'd found several cases where this is exactly what had happened. The methods were different, the locations, but I'm sure those murders were carried out by people who'd been paid by the victim's family. Hitmen? Yes, if you like. 2 of them. I think this pair has actually carried out contract-style honour killings all over the world. Pakistan, Turkey, Syria. Like I said, the ones I'm talking about over here were all slightly different, but in every case, somewhere in the files, there was a reference to 2 men. 2 men seen in a car outside a house or watching a college one of the victims attended. 2 men spotted hanging around near the scene of the crime. I got a few descriptions, and I've got what I reckon is a pretty decent e-fit. You took all this to your superiors, I presume? Of course. So? It's not like the brass wasn't interested, but putting all this together did cause a certain amount of friction. There were community leaders getting up in arms, there were complaints, emails back and forth between various chief constables. In the current climate, this kind of thing's a political hot potato, I suppose. I get why they're wary. Offending delicate sensibilities. Yes. Well, fuck that. Thorne was taken aback to hear Tanner swear, but there was no doubting her passion, her anger. I couldn't agree more, he said. Actually, I rather enjoy offending delicate sensibilities. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you. Thorne smiled, but he was eager to know what the other reasons might be. The fact is, having me out of the picture because of what happened to Susan rather suits everybody, I think. But I know I'm right about this, so I'm buggered if I'm letting it go. Thorne waited. I think these same 2 men killed Susan. Her voice had dropped, broken a little. I think whoever's been paying them to carry out these honour killings put their hands in their pockets and paid to have me killed as well, because I'm becoming a nuisance. They made a mistake. Seeing the look on Tanner's face, Thorne could not help thinking that the men she was talking about had made more than one. Why are you coming to me with this? Because you did such a great job on the Finley thing, and because one of the cases I've been looking at was yours. Thorne put his glass down. Mina Atwell. Thorne remembered the case, because it was one of those that was never solved. They were the ones that stayed with him. Those, and a few of the killers he had managed to catch. The special ones. She was raped and strangled 4 years ago. I know. The words caught in Thorne's throat. Mina Atwell had been a college student, bright and ambitious, trying to be independent. Once we'd done a bit of digging, it made sense to look at the honour-killing angle. We brought in a couple of specialists, but we couldn't make it stick. Of course not, Tanner said, because all the likely suspects had cast-iron alibis, the father and the brothers, everyone. Funny, that. Thorne was trying to remember. Witness statements, house to house. Had there been any mention back then of two individuals who might have been the men Tanner was talking about? So, what exactly do you think I can do? He asked. I don't know yet. I just wanted to see what you made of it, that's all. What your inclination might be. Thorne's inclination at that moment was to down another pint as quickly as possible. How did you know, by the way? Tanner asked. How did I know what? When you were in that therapy group, how did you know which of them it was? A smile, Thorne said. A particular sort of smile. I could see they'd worked out that I was pretending to be something I wasn't, and I knew straight away it was because they were pretending too. You got another one today, Tanner said. A smile. She stood up and grabbed her handbag. Same again? Please. Thorne watched Tanner walk to the bar, raise a hand and succeed in attracting the attention of the barman immediately. She struck Thorne as someone who tended to get what they were after. What your inclination might be, as if she didn't know exactly what it would be. Thorne downed what little was left of his first pint, began to tear the corners off his beer mat. He already had the feeling that the smile he had received from a killer might turn out to be the high point of his day. Chapter 3. As soon as Amaya Shah had pushed through the glass doors of Barnet College and out into the fresh air, she buttoned up her coat and began looking around. People moved quickly past her and away up the concrete steps, most hurrying towards the Mitre or the cheap pizza place on the other side of the road, a few heading left towards the shopping centre. Plenty were loitering in small groups near the doors, talking and smoking, making plans for the rest of the day. Others were already gathered at the bus stop. There were plenty of faces she recognised, of course, other students, members of staff, but none that concerned her. She checked again to be sure, as she always did. Then she reached up and removed her hijab. As she was tucking the blue headscarf carefully into her shoulder bag, Amaya looked up to see Kamal marching towards her across the precinct, a wave and that wonky smile she adored so much. Another look around. There would be no touching, no embrace, not until they were somewhere they both felt safe, but the caution had become second nature. He nodded towards her bag. I thought you didn't wear that here. I don't, Amaya said. I just make sure I've got it on when I come out, that's all. My brother was waiting for me once, and he wasn't happy about it. What do you think? So you put it on, then take it straight off again? Right, like you were wearing that shirt when you left home. Kamal touched his fingers to the shiny material of the two-tone shirt, red and gold like a sunset, tight across his muscular chest. You like it? Amaya nodded. What's in your bag? Nice sensible sweater, maybe? The stupid one with all the stripes? Arsenal shirt. That wonky smile again. What you fancy? She thought about it for a few seconds, then nodded across the road. Pancakes. She grinned and pulled the hood of her anorak up against the drizzle. Chocolate sauce. Amaya ordered precisely what she'd told Kamal she wanted, while he plumped for a banoffee waffle with ice cream. They drank popcorn tea and vanilla milkshakes. From their small table in the window, they each had a good view of the street outside, the parked cars and the passers-by. Kamal said, Did you get my text? Amaya nodded. 8. So, we doing this or what? She looked at him, his perfect teeth and beautiful skin. He had cleared his plate quickly and now sat staring at her, slender fingers drumming on the tabletop, buzzing with it. It was his strength that had brought them this far, enough for her to feed on and cling to, but his excitement also made her nervous. How could he be quite so confident? Why did he never want to talk about what might happen if things didn't work out the way they wanted? "Not sure about the running away bit," she said. "Well, only if we have to. You know that's not what I want, though." "Of course, but we might not have any choice." Amaya nodded again, but she struggled to believe it would ever come to that, in spite of everything, the shouting and worse. Whenever she thought about her mother, she always saw that beaming smile, felt those meaty arms around her, could conjure the smell of the spices that clung to her clothes, to her hair, the garam masala, cardamom and cumin. Her father was different, of course, but she retained her faith in the fact that above all else he loved her, that his desire to see her happy would outstrip everything else when it came down to it. She understood the things he had to say in front of his friends, his wife and sons, the appearance that needed to be maintained for all those other important men. She understood the importance of reputation, but at the end of the day, he was still her dad. "We need to tell them at the same time," Kamal said. "Our parents. You remember that, right?" "Yeah, of course." Amaya looked away, pushed what remained of her pancake through a smear of chocolate sauce. Her ma would already be preparing the evening meal, bent over pots and pans or chopping. "What's the matter?" Kamal leaned forward and touched her hand, just for a second. "You haven't said anything already?" "Not to them." "To who?" Suddenly, Kamal was not sounding quite so confident. Nerves, fear in his whisper. "I told a friend in college." She looked at him. "It's okay. A white girl. She won't breathe a word to anyone. Nobody else. Tell me." Amaya knew that she had to be truthful. If what they were planning was ever going to happen, there had to be honesty, and besides, Kamal was the last person in the world she would ever lie to. "My brother takes my phone sometimes." "So? He doesn't know your PIN number, right?" "He made me tell him." Amaya closed her eyes. She did not want to remember how. "Said I shouldn't have secrets from the family, that there was nothing to worry about if I didn't have anything to hide." "I told you," Kamal said. "I told you to always delete my messages." "I do," Amaya hissed at him across the table. "I'm not stupid. Just, he might have seen something before I deleted it. I'm just saying." Kamal looked serious, but only for a few seconds before he shrugged, and the smile came back, the smile that was never far away. "Well, all the more reason to tell the rent sooner than later, right?" "I suppose," Amaya said. They said nothing for a while, looking at their phones and glancing out at the street every few seconds, the spatter of drizzle crawling down the window as it began to grow dark outside. "So, what about this party then?" Kamal held his arms out. "If you think this shirt is good, wait until you see what I've got lined up for tonight." "It's tonight? Come on, Ami," he growled in mock frustration. "I sent you a message last week." Amaya stared at him, wide-eyed, sarcastic. "I deleted the text, genius, like you told me." "You're still coming, though, yeah?" "It's so late. I'd have to leave after dinner." "It's a party. Look, I can use my dad's account to get us an Uber back." Amaya thought about it. "Well, someone's got to keep an eye on you, I suppose. Stop you getting into trouble again. Bloody ha. I could always tell them I'm going round to Sarah's house to study. She's the girl I was telling you about." "There you go. They'll want her number, but that's not a problem. I've lent her notes plenty of times, so I'm sure she'll cover for me if I ask her. Make sure you stash some decent party clothes in your bag. None of your Primark rubbish, okay? I don't want you showing me up." Amaya grinned and stuck her tongue out. She was already thinking about what to wear, picturing the silver top she'd bought at River Island and sneaked into the house the week before. It was at the back of her wardrobe in an old suitcase, where her brother would never find it. Kamal reached across and took her plate. He picked up the fork. "And if you want to keep that gorgeous figure, you'd better let me finish this." Chapter 4. It was hard to think properly, to clear sufficient headspace for it, with the voices from the next room and the multicoloured chaos of discarded toys and games at his feet. One of those occasions when Thorne wished he was alone, back at his own place on God's side of the river, the flat which...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?